Hi everyone, happy Easter. Miss Elizabeth here for First Congregational Church of Muskegon confirmation class. Welcome. We are following progressive Christianity curriculum that our church has purchased. However, we do not own the copyrights to this material. We are following along in our Unit 7 about the integrity of the earth. Our third lesson today talks about rhythms and balances. And many rhythms occur in nature's cycles: tides, phases of the moon, rotation of the earth from day to night, birth, youth, adulthood, old age, and death. Thinking about these cycles and life's rhythms can help us begin to understand that we cannot stop the changes in life, and some of those changes are sad. But when we accept them and are willing to feel our feelings, feel sorrow or grief, or joy and happiness, we can move through them with grace. I'd like to read a Bible verse from Ecclesiastes in chapter 3. So it begins, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together." We're continuing to focus on our relationship with the earth, and we're talking about rhythms and balances in nature. Looking at nature, we can see that there is a natural balance, like the sun and the moon, and we can learn by watching and respecting nature that we also need balance within ourselves and our lives. Now I'm going to say some words, and I'd like you to think in your head of a word that is opposite. Night, sweet, glad, forest, dark, water, sharp, sun, heavy, tiny, running, plant, death, excitement, summer. Now, opposites do not necessarily represent good versus bad. I mean, some of those words I gave you, like sweet, maybe you thought of sour as an opposite. Well, those two are not, either one of them, always good or always bad. So here's another example. If you wanted to pound in a nail, you need something hard. But if you wanted to put your head down, you would look for something soft. If you wanted to play in the snow, you need winter. But if you want to swim, you're going to need summer. Now, opposites also aren't always called opposites. Sometimes that word just means that they are across from each other, that they're not next to each other, but they may still be talking. Here's something I showed you last week. Remember this? This is the color wheel. And you have the colors, all 12 colors in the spectrum around the outside of the color wheel. And where they're farthest apart from each other is where they are opposite from each other on the color wheel, on this circle. So yellow is across from purple. However, in color theory and art, we don't call that opposites. We call it complementary colors. So maybe think about that. Complementary colors have something kind to say to the one that is across from it. And actually, in color theory, those two across from each other, the complementary colors, when you mix them together, they make a beautiful shade of gray. And so it comes together to make something completely new and interesting. I'd also like to show you some of the things that talk about rhythms in nature. Not everything is opposite. In fact, one of those words I gave you, summer, maybe as an opposite you thought of winter, but that's only because it's happening in a cycle, which could be a rhythm. Think of this. Springtime turns into summer, and then autumn, and then winter. So it's just a cycle, because after winter, we go back to springtime. So that is a rhythm in nature. Another thing that's a rhythm in nature that I also showed you is this little card folding, never-ending card. This is the phases of the moon. The new moon is almost like a completely dark sky. And then our next phase is a waxing moon. It's getting bigger, and this is the first quarter moon. And then it gets even bigger, and we have the full moon. And then we follow that up with, a crescent moon. So that shows us the phases of the moon, because then we go back to the new moon. And it goes all over again. So another cycle or rhythm. And lots of things happen according to those rhythms. Some of those things that happen to us in a rhythm are sad, but some of them are good. Now let's talk about how does that relate to Easter? Well, let's think about that. God and God's love creates the world and all of nature. Next, God and God's love creates all the creatures and humans in the world. And then God and God's love sends Jesus to live and die as a human. And then, as we celebrate today on Easter, God and God's love resurrects Jesus, brings him back to life to reconnect us with God's love and all of creation. So happy Easter. See you next time.